Severin Films has done what we thought was the impossible. For many, many years, the cinematic legacy of Russ Meyer seemed that it was lost, seemed that it was really confined to some kind of pricey releases from RM Films International, the folks that were running Russ Meyer's film company after he passed away. There weren't a lot of releases. The releases weren't really remastered, and a lot of hardcore fans, based on various information coming from various places, thought that maybe the films were lost. Maybe we would never see release of these for various reasons. And Severin Films has done the seemingly impossible, and they have released what's known as the Vixen trilogy on Blu-ray. I'm going to review these separately because I'm really going to probably ramble a lot about each of these. And who needs an hour and 45-minute thing of me talking about 3 Russ Meyer films? So we're going to start off with SUPERVIXENS, and I'm going to interject a lot into this. This is maybe my favorite of the Russ Meyer films, certainly my favorite of his 70s films. If you don't know about Russ Meyer, I'll do a really tiny thing in this one. I'm not going to do it in any of the other videos. Russ Meyer was a guy who, he had 2 big interests in life, and that was the shadow casting overhang of abundantly endowed females and filmmaking and World War II. 3, but really 2. So he was a combat photographer in World War II. He came back from the war and he got into industrial filmmaking and pinup photography. He eventually got into making what they called nudie cutie films, which were very early, you'd say adult films, but it was just basically very, very innocuous nudity that felt like comic strips come to life, or like Playboy cartoons come to life, or something like that. He went from the nudie cuties into a period of doing black and white melodramas where there were rural melodramas, and it was usually a lusty female and a husband, and they couldn't get it together, and there would be infidelities and sex and violence and all that. Again, not really explicit, a little bit of nudity here and there, always with abundantly blessed females in the starring roles, or really kind of in every role. And he moved from that into the sort of the tail end of that was Faster Pussycat Kill Kill, which is probably his best known film, with Tourist Satana and Haji and Laurie Williams as these 3 sports car driving go-go dancers who just unleash violent mayhem in the desert with Stuart Lancaster. And then he moved into these color films that were, again, sort of soapy melodramas with a lot of nudity and some violence and male-female conflict and things like that. The biggest of which was Vixen in 1968, which we will talk about separately. Vixen is one of the releases in this first trio of discs that Severin is releasing from the RM Trust, Russ Meyer Trust, or RM Films Incorporated. The Russ Meyer Trust is the company set up after his death to manage his assets and his legacy and the income from and all that. And Vixen was huge, controversial and huge, saucy, X-rated. But when you say X-rated now, you think hardcore porn. His movies were never that. They got closer and closer to that, but they were never that. And Vixen was huge, and he made a few more movies. And then in 1975, the movie we're here to talk about today, SUPERVIXENS, this directed by Russ Meyer, written, produced, photographed, edited, and directed by Russ Meyer, who also appears very briefly in the film, as he often would. Stars Shari, Eubank, Charles Pitt, Charles Napier, Uschi, Digard, Stuart Lancaster, Colleen Brennan, Deborah Maguire, John Lazar, Haji, and more. This is an interesting movie. Originally, this was rated X as well. There's a lot of nudity in it. There's some simulated rutting, but it's very brief and at a distance and ridiculous. And it's mostly just a lot of outrageously abundant females. Big bosoms and square jaws is what Russ Meyer used to say. And it was the title of an excellent book about Russ Meyer as well. But they're basically living cartoons. He always said he was inspired by Al Cap and like Lil Abner and stuff like that. Basic story of SUPERVIXEN goes a little something like this. Our lead is Clint Ramsey. He's a simple, nice guy who works at Martin Bormann's service station, gas station out in the desert somewhere. His wife is very lusty, portrayed by Shari Eubank, who only did a couple movies. She did this movie and a film entitled, you're going to think something, it's not what it is, this film entitled Chesty Anderson, U.S. Navy, which is like a strangely chaste, PG-rated drive-in comedy, really about female naval recruits. But Shari Eubank was only like in these 2 movies. She's really good in this. I mean, she's incredibly easy on the eyes and abundantly endowed, but she's actually a really good actress in this movie too. It's a shame that we didn't see her do more. She kind of reverted back to private life and never really talks. Excuse me, I get choked up when I talk about Shari Eubank. She never really talks about or acknowledges this film, which is a shame because it would be really interesting to hear so many decades later somebody's recollections of this film on its 50th anniversary this year. So Clint Ramsey has this insatiable wife who's also a bit of a shrew. She thinks he's fooling around on her. I'm not going to tell you the whole story. They have a domestic dispute. He leaves, she throws him out. Police shows up to handle this dispute, played by Charles Napier, who's named the same as his character from the previous Meyer film, 1970, I believe, 70, 71, or 69, somewhere in there. Cherry, Harry, and Raquel. And this film also references earlier Russ Meyer movies a lot, either in character names or bringing actors from the repertory company back who seemingly are the same character they were in another movie. It's this weird mashup where it's like he made movies up to a point, and SUPERVIXENS is the point where his movies either become self-parody or they become really like a comic strip or a cartoon, more so than they ever did before. So, back to the story, of which there is, whatever story there is. So there's a domestic dispute. Charles Napier, the cop, shows up. Really, really not a good guy. He basically has a little attempted fling with Angel, which is Shari Eubank's character name, our hero's wife. Little fling does not go well. Things get very shockingly violent. Now there's a moment, I'll tell you right now, if you're sensitive to domestic violence, shall we say, or violence in general, this film is incredibly light in tone. It's very goofy, it's very sexy, it's very silly, but there are a couple of moments where there's male on female violence that's really like ugly. And there is a moment in this film, if you're incredibly sensitive, I will say be very careful when Shari Eubank goes into the bathroom in this film. That's not like that, but it's the kind of film, a lot of people will show this to friends. Sometimes friends will check out at that point. But just rest assured that as ugly as that gets, the movie is very funny and fun other than that. So something very bad happens and our hero flees, fearing that he is going to be pinned on a crime. And he is just sort of a rambling guy. The majority of the film is him just going from place to place, getting into situations where he has to flee. Usually it's like a farmer's daughter kind of situation where he gets into a situation. Women, always abundantly blessed, are throwing themselves at him and he's either oblivious or is not interested. He's hitchhiking along. Stuart Lancaster picks him up. He's a nice farmer, generous. He says, I'll give you a place to stay. I'll give you a place to work off your room and board. That's cool. Stuart Lancaster's wife is portrayed by the legendary Uschi Digard, and she is his Austrian wife. My Austrian wife, as he keeps saying. She's just milking a cow suggestively and things like that. She wants a piece of Clint. He's not interested because he walks the noble path. And it's just a series of things like that where he meets different people and females who are after him and keeps running. Eventually he meets up with Harry, the evil cop, again, and things go into an outrageous direction. I love this movie. This is not for everybody. This period of Russ Meyer movies, they're not normal movies. They're weird. They're incredibly strange films, as it were. It's the nudity, it's how the women are shot, it's how the film is shot. He was an incredible filmmaker. If you can look beyond the sexploitation aspect of it, his camera setups were phenomenal. His editing was phenomenal. The music was really interesting and fun and silly. He did not take these films seriously. Even the dramas he didn't take terribly seriously. And that's the thing too, is that these are ridiculous films in terms of their comedies, but at least the Vixen trilogy really are. But everybody plays it straight, and that makes it even funnier. And that makes it even funnier that some people don't know that these things are comedies. So I love SUPERVIXENS. We'll just get that out of the way. This new Severin transfer, it's a 4K restoration from the original negative. It looks unbelievable. Now, have a long history with these Russ Meyer films, from renting them on the original RM Films videotapes back in the 90s when I first moved to a town that had a video store that had a lot of these. I've seen them on tape. The history of Russ Meyer on home video goes a little something like this. Sometime around the late 80s, and I found out about these on Entertainment Tonight. Of all places, Entertainment Tonight did a report with Russ Meyer and maybe even Kitten and Digard talking about these, releasing his films on video, and he did these painstaking, expensive restorations and transfers for his VHS release. But the thing was, those were great in their day, and they looked great for the time, but he only ever did that one set of transfers. So they came out on tape. That's cool. They came out on Laserdisc, and it's really, I wish I had grabbed it. I've got a copy. It's the Vixen collection, they called it. It was the same 3 movies that Severin's releasing now, and they were put out on Laserdisc, and they looked great. But the whole thing at the time was Laserdisc had a higher resolution than videotape, so it was the same video transfers, but they just looked better on Laserdisc. Not incredibly better, but better. And there were extras. The Laserdisc brought us the audio commentaries for those films in that box set: Vixen, Supervixens, and Beneath the Valley, the Ultravixens. Those commentaries have been retained for the DVD reissues that have come out subsequent to that, and they have been retained for these too. So you do get, even though the man's been gone for many years, there are Russ Meyer commentaries on these 3 Blu-rays, and they're we'll get to that. So they came out on Laserdisc, and a few of his other movies came out on Laserdisc. I believe there was a Motorpsycho and Faster Pussycat Laserdisc, and there might have been one other, but there weren't a lot that came out on Laserdisc. And then DVD came along, and Arrow, which is now, it's kind of a different company than it used to be, but an earlier incarnation of Arrow in the UK put out a set of just about all of his movies, or a lot of his movies. Some of them had new extras, not many, but they were all utilizing those same videotape masters. So again, they only looked so good. They didn't really look any better than the Laserdiscs did. That's all we had to work with. RM Films put out their own DVDs, a lot of those here, again, working from those same masters. They put out a Blu-ray, which I never saw, but they did put out a Blu-ray of Faster Pussycat, so that apparently was a new transfer, but I've never been able to see it. But the excitement here is that Severin Films has worked a deal with the Russ Meyer Trust to put these things out on Blu-ray now, and the hope is that if these do well, we'll get more. And there'll be more little bundles of these that come out over time, because I'm such a huge fan. I want all of these preserved. I want to know that there are new 4K masters of all of his films. I want to know that all the outtakes are preserved. I want to know that every scrap of anything the man touched is preserved somewhere, and that we can see them and get them on the releases. Now, these releases, I'm just going to talk about SUPERVIXENS now. I've watched Vixen. I'll talk about that one in a separate review. And I'm about to watch Beneath the Valley of the Ultravixens, which I love. Looking forward to that one, too. I've never seen this movie look this good. I don't know if this movie looked this good in the theater, frankly. The colors are phenomenal. The skin tones are supernatural. They're super sharp. These, going back to the videotape releases, what we had up to this point were 4x3 releases of these films. They weren't pan and scan. They were open matte. So you saw the entire exposed film frame. So there might be super fans who want to retain those older releases, because you do get a little bit more information at the top and bottom, but in most cases it's stuff that was never intended to be seen by anybody, and it's headroom up above and whatever. There's a scene with Deborah Maguire in SUPERVIXENS where it's a little reference to the Black Power movement at the time, where she raises a fist in the air, and every version I've seen this movie until today had like this weird soft widescreen matting you could see over just that shot. And it was always weird to me, where everything was 4x3 and looked okay, but that one scene with the fist in the air had like bars over it, not completely blocking the image, but semi-transparent bars. This is the first time I've seen it, and it's framed perfectly. And that was what I wondered going into this too, was, were those films originally shot and intended to be projected 4x3? I didn't think so ever, but you never know. That's just how he always chose to present them. Now, he was choosing to present them that way because widescreen letterboxing wasn't common on videotape in the 80s, and he wanted it to look like, home video should at the time. So, and then nobody ever did a transfer after that. But looking at these with a critical eye, maybe there's one shot in SUPERVIXENS where you might be missing a little of what's below the frame, and what's below the frame, let's just say, is more of Uschi Digard, but not a lot. Like this, it looked like it was really well framed. And in that, these movies look better now than they did on videotape, not just resolution-wise, but this is the way they were supposed to look. Like, when somebody shoots a shot for widescreen, they generally are putting things in the frame a certain way to have it look good. And when you open it up and there's all this dead space, it looks less exciting, less interesting, less dynamic. These movies look, I almost said it, phenomenal. So let's get on to the extras. So the movie's great. How explicit is this? If you've never seen a Russ Meyer movie, a lot of topless, a lot of naked women, a lot of, I can't use the word I normally would use, silly effing is what I would say. That's what I came up with that from watching Russ Meyer movies, where people are having their way with each other. They're shot, they're doing it on a bed, but the camera is underneath the bed and there's no mattress on the bed, so you're looking up through bed springs, or people are on a mountaintop, or people are in a river, and it's not meant to be taken seriously. It's ridiculous, and it's just wonderful. There is male nudity, but they're done with prosthetic things that you occasionally will see a very fleeting shot of, and he did it from this point onward. He did that in these films to make the men look as overblessed as the women, shall we say. And it's funny, and these movies are just, I can't say enough about it. So tech specs on this, it comes with optional English SDH subtitles, so if you really want to soak up the dialogue, and the Meyer dialogue is usually pretty phenomenal, those are there. It looks, as I said, unbelievably good. Sorry, just glancing at my notes. Yes, this is the film that brought the word growler into my vocabulary. Charles Napier rolls up at the gas station at a later point in the film. I neglected to mention where the story goes. I'm not going to tell you the whole story. Where the story goes is that Clint Ramsey ultimately winds up meeting a woman who looks just like his former wife, only she's a wonderful person, and her name is Vixen, or she's called Super Vixen. In this film, everybody is super something, so you get references to his previous films. They're not supposed to be the same characters, but they're the same character names as like a little reminder. You have Super Lorna, Super Cherry, Super Vixen, Harry Sledge from the other film. Haji is referred to Super Haji, so every woman is super something. It's pretty funny. Charles Napier rolls up at the gas station. He's like, "Hey man, where's the growler?" And Clint says, "Growler?" And then I can't repeat the line afterwards, but it's always made me laugh, and I now occasionally among friends refer to the bathroom as the growler. So this is, it has the original Russ Meyer commentary that was recorded in the late 80s. Russ Meyer eventually developed dementia and passed away as a result of dementia. I don't know where, I deeply respect and love the man. Many may have qualms with what he put in his films and his attitudes about various things, but I think he was amazing at what he did. This is a guy who pretty much had nothing and made himself rich making these movies. At some point on the commentary, he says that this movie made $18 million in 1975, and that's back when tickets were like $1 or $1.50. This was a phenomenally successful filmmaker, independent filmmaker. He worked for Fox on 2 movies. He was hired by Fox to wind up saving the studio. He did excuse me, I get choked up when I talk about Beyond the Valley of the Dolls in 1970, and then The 7 Minutes in 1971, which did not do well and ended his relationship with studios. But otherwise, he was a guy who was just doing it on his own, and he would just take the money he made on one film and use that to fund the next one. He made them very, very cheaply. I think he said there was probably 11 people total who worked on this movie. He said it was like 5 on the crew and 6 actors. They would shoot without permits out in the desert. The man was amazing, and I'm really hoping that these films coming out on Blu-ray now through Severin, and they're available on 4K as well. I have Blu-rays here. I'm talking about the Blu-rays. I'm going to buy the 4Ks because I love these movies so much, and knowing how good they look on Blu-ray, I just want to have it. If it looks even a little bit better on 4K, I want to have that because I just love these films. I'm hoping that these being available again are really going to help restore his legacy or have his legacy catch up with where it should be right now, because when he was putting his films out himself, he put them out on videotape. If you called his office to order videotapes of the Russ Meyer films, oftentimes apparently you were talking to him. He would pick up the phone and put the orders through, but they were always $89.95. They never went down in price. And the DVDs that the Russ Meyer Trust or RM Films were putting out were usually like $39.95. They were very expensive. They never came down to like consumer-friendly prices, so to speak. So, and these Severin discs are not dirt cheap either, but they're totally worth it. And knowing that if you're buying these releases, it's going to help make sure that more of them come out. I wouldn't say I would pay any price for these, but I have no beef with what these cost for what they are and for how much I never thought I was going to get them. Hopefully these being available may lead to more film screenings of these or theatrical screenings of these. Maybe they'll wind up streaming sometime. I don't know. I just hope these things get out there and more people find out about them, because it is a massive cult phenomenon that has always been bubbling under the surface because of how hard these were to get. You had to import the Arrow DVDs, or people were just selling, lack of any other way to do it. They were just making American-friendly bootlegs of those DVDs. Throw all that crap away. I want these to be the definitive versions, and I want these to be official and legit. I want the money to go where it's supposed to go, and I want more and more and more of these. He didn't make Well, he did make a lot of movies in his lifetime, and I really just want to own them all and not have to buy them again. So the extras, the Russ Meyer commentary, I mentioned the dementia thing. He kind of is all over the place in these commentaries. It's a little bit more play-by-play on these commentaries than I would like him to be, but you're hanging out with Russ Meyer watching one of his movies. He is very off color in a lot of things. He says a lot of things that you think maybe a legal department now would not let go through, in terms of things he says about some of the actors, things he says about some famous people. It's a very dishy. He comes out with some great phrases that I can't repeat here about various people and things. It's just, it's very, and he gets into the nitty gritty of how he shot some things, how he got these movies made, the finances and all that, the censorship problems. So the commentaries are phenomenal. They're not as nonstop talk as you might hope they are, but they're worth listening to. You have some new extras on here. You have Russ Meyer versus the Pornbusters, Mike Carroll interview with Russ Meyer from November 20th, 1990. It's 24 minutes, and it was done in his house, basically talking about his views on adult films and pornography. And at this point, Russ Meyer he always talked about doing more films. There's a film called The Jaws of Vixen, or The Jaws of Lorna, that he was going to make. Later on, there was a film, and again, written by Roger Ebert. If you weren't aware, he and Roger Ebert collaborated on the script for Beyond the Valley of the Dolls and several of the rest of Russ Meyer's films. Usually Ebert was writing under a pseudonym. And Ebert apparently, right up until the end of Russ Meyer's intended film career, was still working on doing films with him. And he talked about this movie called The Bra of God. I've always wanted to try to find a copy of that script somewhere. Ebert wrote the script for the Sex Pistols movie that Russ Meyer started making but wound up aborting, called Who Killed Bambi. Ebert actually did, on his blog, release that script at some point. So I would love it if Chaz Ebert or somebody, if there was a script for The Bra of God, I would love to read it. I would love to know what a 90s Russ Meyer movie was going to be. Was it going to be different from his other movies? Was it going to continue to be one of these weird self-referential films, or was he going to do something else? So talking in this interview from 1990, he's still talking as though he's going to continue making films, and it's his position on where pornography has gone, he felt like he didn't want to go that way in his films. That was always the thing why he stopped making movies with the Beneath the Valley of the Ultravixens in 79, is that he didn't want to compete with hardcore. He didn't want to do that. He wasn't interested in where things go into other things and fluids and all that explicit stuff. He was interested in other stuff, and his style of filmmaking was kind of being squeezed out by all that. It's interesting to hear him talking still with an idea that he might keep making movies in this interview. The Return of Harry Sledge, it is an interview with Charles Napier. It's 19 minutes. That was done for the Arrow the previous Arrow DVD edition. So I'm going to talk about that too. I bought the Arrow DVDs for the Russ Meyer films that had anything that the Laserdiscs didn't. So this is not one of those, but the Charles Napier interview was done for those other sets of discs. I don't know if that was originally on the SUPERVIXENS disc or what. So it's a port over. So if you have the other thing, this is one less reason to have the other thing, unless, of course, as I said, you want to have that full frame experience. You have the Incredibly Strange Film Show, Season 1, Episode 5 on Russ Meyer from 1988. This was an incredibly important series for me when it aired on the Discovery Channel, probably around 1989, hosted by a UK TV presenter, Jonathan Ross. Each episode talked about either a genre of kind of cult weirdo film or a specific filmmaker or two filmmakers. And Severin has been licensing these and putting these on some of their Blu-ray sets. They put the Ray Dennis Steckler one on the Ray Dennis Steckler set, and they put the Ed Wood one on their hardwood set of the Ed Wood adult films, and the Russ Meyer one here. The Russ Meyer one is notable because it was never released in the US. I think it was something about licensing clips. Probably RM was probably asking for more money than Discovery Channel wanted to pay to get those clips, and it was never part of the package. So it was always something you had to get as a bootleg. I used to do a lot of tape trades on the internet, and that was one of the big things I was excited about getting, was I was able to get that Russ Meyer episode, because it's interviews with him and a lot of his cast and crew, not even 10 years after he made his last movie, when he was still, again, pretty vital in planning to make more movies, heavily filled with clips of things that we've never seen anywhere else. Clips from his autobiography film that never was completed, or maybe it was completed, but it was never released. So there's some really important stuff for Meyer fans and historians included in that episode of the show. Thrilled that that's in there. That's 39 minutes. Doesn't look a lot better than it would have. It might even be the source if somebody had just recorded it at home on their VCR when it aired in the UK, but thrilled to have it. The trailer for this film, 2 minutes, and a TV spot for this film, it's 30 seconds. And the idea that you would see that you could cut a TV spot for this film is great. And I would love to have known where and when this aired, because it still kind of has some abundant imagery in it, just nothing explicit. So the disc itself, this is the Blu-ray. I absolutely, always one of my favorite posters of his films. That's Christy Hartberg. She's only in the movie for a brief moment, but it's a very memorable and funny moment. It replicates the look of the old RM Films videotape releases, as did the Laserdisc releases too. And I just love that it's like this, because it's another part of his history and his legacy were those videotape releases. That's how a lot of people saw them. So the fact that it uses the original poster is great, because, you know, try to find one of those cheaply, and it just looks just like the old videotape box did. Front and back is still the same color scheme, or whatever you want to call it. Crack it open, nothing too fancy, just, you know, just that. But beyond thrilled. As you can see, I've talked for damn near a half hour about this release of SUPERVIXENS, with probably really, without talking about anything really of substance. If you like cult movies, if you like sexploitation movies, if you like 70s drive-in movies, this is a must. This Charles Napier you'll recognize. Charles Napier, if you're a mainstream moviegoer, you're not into the world of 70s adult film, or 70s pinup, or 70s sexploitation, or whatever. Charles Napier is the guy you'll recognize for being the head of the Good Old Boys and the Blues Brothers. He's in a lot of Jonathan Demme movies. He's in Silence of the Lambs. He's in a lot of stuff. So he's probably the most recognizable person in this. Uschi was everywhere in the 70s. Stuart Lancaster did some other stuff, but not a lot. And anybody else, Charles Pitt went on to be like a singer, like an opera singer. And it's just very interesting. It's I love this movie. I could talk for 2 hours about this, and you're probably glad that I'm wrapping it up right now. On Blu-ray, Severin Films, and 4K, bless Severin Films, Russ Meyer's SUPERVIXENS.